Hi, I'm AJ Titter, author of Magic and Myth, and this is the third video in my series where I'm reading scenes from my free short story, Torched Feathers. I will link the first video down in the description in case you haven't been following along, but let's get into this third scene. Within a seven night, the axemen from Halgrond hacked the sturdiest trees. The chopping echoed an odd song in Fledgling's ears. They warned the children not to play near the outsiders, but curiosity got the better of the older ones. She and Kitten held back, however. They had an example to set as the next Canna and Emmis. But shouldn't we understand more about them? Kitten asked Fledgling as they tied sticks together into dolls a month after the Cutters came. If they become enemies, how will we fight them if we don't understand them? We have an agreement. Fledgling put down the doll she was working on. They gave us the cloak. Some say the men chopping the trees are captives, forced to do whatever the king tells them, or he'll slaughter their families. Fledgling picked up a few more sticks. She arranged them into a body, arms, and legs. Then she took the leather thong and began wrapping. Seems like a fish story. The king was more than generous to give us the cloak. Why would he threaten people into obedience when he can give them things? Kitten shrugged as she put her doll down. Maybe we can find out if we go with the others. She grabbed Fledgling's arm and yanked her up. Fledgling planted her feet and pulled her arm from Kitten's grip. If they find out we went, we'll be given to a grandmother. We'll have to do all her chores plus our own, and we'll have to do them without the animals. Fledgling huffed and sat back down. The animals tell us the men chop wood. Doesn't seem like there's much going on. Kitten squatted next to her, gripping her arm once more. If I go alone, you know they'll tease you. She met her friend's large round eyes. Fine, just once. Kitten pulled her up, knocking the figure she was working on from her hands. Her hard work burst apart on the dirt. As they neared the edge of the forest, Kitten dragged her toward the holly bushes where the other children spied on the loggers. Kitten wanted to go right to the front, but Fledgling hung back. We can't see anything back here, Kitten hissed. Fledgling looked at the nearest trees and pointed. Here, I'll boost you onto that branch. We can climb up and get a better view. Fledgling laced her fingers together, putting her hands down for Kitten to step into. Kitten put one foot into Fledgling's hands while using the tree to steady herself. When Kitten nodded, Fledgling used all her might to heave her friend up to the lowest branch. Kitten hung by her armpits. She swung her legs from side to side until she had enough momentum to hook one leg over the branch. Once she was secure, she held out her hand to help Fledgling. Kitten climbed to another branch while Fledgling stayed on the lower one. As she looked out from her perch, Fledgling's eyes grew wide at the number of tree stumps before her. She covered her mouth to muffle a cry. This isn't right, she thought. Another chop of the axe resounded. Fledgling flinched. When she could no longer bear the destruction, she dropped down and walked to the nearest axeman. Someone grabbed her shoulder. Her mother. Fledgling looked up, trying to detect how the scene was affecting her. The thwack of an axe biting into a tree caused Fledgling's body to jerk. She closed her eyes. I wish we hadn't given them our forest. They've ruined it. Can't we stop them? Her mother shook her head. We can't go back on our word. Fledgling grabbed the neck of her hide tunic as another thwack caused her to flinch. I can't hear or feel the trees, but it still hurts. Why? Her mother knelt and wiped a tear from Fledgling's cheek. Because you are the heart of our clan. You're meek and compassionate. You have great strength, Fledgling, though it's different from the fearlessness of Kitten. Fledgling flung her arms around her mother. The warmth of her mother's embrace nourished her soul. Her mother released her, and Fledgling stepped back. Observe the sapling, she said as she pointed to a scrubby pine a few feet from where they stood. Pain doesn't last forever. The forest will regrow. Fledgling understood the wisdom of her mother's words, but her heart continued to ache as Canna took her hand and led her back to the village. When they arrived at their wigwag, Fledgling crawled into her bedding and pulled the woven blanket over her head. As she rested her tear-stained face against her pillow, she inhaled the aroma of lavender until the familiar scent relaxed her muscles. She closed her eyes, but the sight of Stump stretching on forever brought the tears back. As she wept, Canna sat outside the wigwag and sang as she sewed a new set of hide leggings, which hid Fledgling's sobs from the other clansmen. Over the next few days, Fledgling served her punishment by helping the grandmothers and grandfathers. In truth, she was glad it gave her an excuse not to sneak back with the other children. Fledgling spent her days far away from the edge of the forest, gathering water, fishing, weaving, and preparing hides for tanning. By sunset on the third day, her arms ached from her braiding of a lopalo hide, which wasn't even halfway done. Once again, Fledgling raised the bone as high as she could, and using both hands, she pressed hard, scraping the red hair from the hide. Chores aren't so bad, Fledgling thought as she scraped. Thinking about the pain in my arms is better than my heart, and I'm acting more like a leader than Kitten. A smug smile crept across Fledgling's face. Quick and heavy footsteps caused Fledgling to turn around. Their wigwag obscured part of her view. No warning from the animals sounded, so it had to be one of their own. Canna, an older brother yelled as he ran into the village. Her mother appeared from inside the wigwag. She glanced at the stretching frame to make sure Fledgling was safe. What is it, brother? The gray vultures spied a swarm of men riding to the new fort. Calm yourself, Canna said to the man and the crowd that was gathering. They have made no signs of ill will toward us. We knew a fort would mean men. Our agreement with them has not changed. An older sister of the Earth Clan stepped around Fledgling. I will not wait for them to take our freedom. I'll guard our border with the Lorcas. You will do no such thing, Emma said as she walked into the village with a brace of quail slung over her shoulder. What do you think will happen if we patrol our side? She handed the quail off before continuing toward the older sister. They will send their men to patrol. The older sister's cheeks darkened as she bowed her head. We hold to our agreement, Emma said. They have not entered the forest apart from the cutting what they need. Soon they will finish carting the timber and be even further away. But over the next few months, they didn't keep to their fort. As colder weather set in and food on the plain grew scarcer, the men hunted at the new edge of the forest. They buried traps under the leaves and snow. Fledgling slept with her hands over her ears to drown out the screams of the injured and dying animals. After a week of torture, a group of older brothers and sisters took it upon themselves to find the traps and warn the animals of their locations. Canna and the others said nothing, but from prayers throughout the night, Fledgling knew her mother was both grateful and uneasy. A few days later, a man stood at the edge of the village with his horse, resembling a bird with his fur-lined, puffy overgown covering his brown quilted doublet. Wool hose was the only thing keeping his legs warm, and it completed the image of a bird standing on skinny legs. Hey, animal whispers. I demand to speak with your leader. Villagers stopped their work, got up from their fires, and came out of their wigwags. They kept their distance from the uninvited guest. Canna and Fledgling joined the rest, keeping toward the back. Nain shuffled through the crowd, handing her toddler off to a fingerling as she bridged the distance between the crowd and the stranger. Bundled in her winter hides lined with fur, only her face was visible. They told me women ruled here. Never expected 'em to be so pretty, the man said as he rocked back on his heels. Your flattery is unwelcome. She slipped her hands into her pockets. Say your piece, or leave. The man took a few steps forward, closing the gap between them. He bent close so his face was mere inches from Nain's. Tell your people to stop warning the animals from our traps. As he stood up straight, he said, If they don't, we'll have to catch the children and eat them." He then gave them a large, toothy grin. The villagers gasped. Women clutched their little ones tighter and pushed the older children behind them. Fledgling moved closer to her mother, who put her arm around the small girl. Nain lifted her chin. "You would attack us over some squirrels?" "All you need to do is ask an animal to stop dead. We have to hunt to feed ourselves." "You know nothing. We hunt with honor. Perhaps you should have prepared better in the warmer months. Our agreement did not include feeding you. Now go," Nain said before turning back toward the villagers. The man grabbed her arm. "This isn't over, putrelle." Nain looked from the man's hand to his face. "I don't recognize that word, but I can guess its meaning. Remove your hand before I have something remove it for you." The man hesitated before letting go. He huffed, then turned and mounted his horse. He glared at those gathered before pulling his horse around and kicking her sides to prompt a swift retreat. Nain let out a huge breath. She walked back on unsteady legs. Her hands trembled as she took her child from the fingerling, hugging him tight. "Now can we do something about them?" a brother to Nain's left asked. Nain found Canna and Emmis in the crowd. Emmis spoke up first. "Guard the village." "Do not provoke them," Canna added. "We have a right to defend ourselves, but any act of aggression they will use to justify war." The surge of predators, like the lorcus and the great hooded owl, deterred the Halgrondites from coming too close to the village, avoiding further altercations until the spring. The fort responded by increasing its population. When the first herd of Lapalo returned with the warmer weather, a large hunting party left the fort. The men killed more Lapalo than they could eat and dumped the excess carcasses at the village edge. The villagers skinned and prepared as much of the gifted meat as they could. They invited the vultures and carrion beetles to the rest, but even they couldn't eat fast enough to prevent a stench from hovering around the village. The stench pushed Fledgling to the opposite end of the forest, to the sea, where she sat on the beach collecting fish that a heron had speared for her. She hummed as she worked, letting the lap of the water be her cadence. Water, leaking from Irma's bag, broke the rhythm as he waded back to shore with a large bounty of abalone. "How did you learn to dive so deep if you can't talk to the animals?" Fledgling asked Irmis as he came out of the water. He pushed his long, saturated hair out of his face. "Just because I don't have the gift doesn't mean I can't watch and learn." The heron shook his head, flinging another fish at her. "Thank you for fishing with me," she said to the bird. "We're almost done." As Irma stood next to her and dried off, he leaned over and wrung out his hair on Fledgling. The cold drips ran down Fledgling's scalp and onto her bare neck. "Hey," Fledgling said as she laughed and scrunched her shoulders up to her ears. He wrapped himself up tight in his furs before sitting down. "How do you think we should repay the Halgrondites?" The heron stabbed another fish, and this time he brought it to her. She slid it from his beak, said a blessing, and offered it back to him. The heron dipped his head in thanks before swallowing the fish whole. "I know most of the younger clansmen want to harm them." Fledgling stared at the waves. "Haven't the animals suffered enough because of our conflict?" She looked at Irmis, but he said nothing. "When we spoke with the spirits, they said Halgrond reached across the whole land," Fledgling continued as she turned back to watch the water. "If that's true, what would fighting accomplish?" The pair sat in silence. "Come on, we should head back," Irmis said as he picked up his bag. Fledgling slung the basket of fish over her shoulder and took his hand. As they neared the village, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. Loud voices assaulted her ears, halting her steps. Her heart hammered her chest, almost overtaking the voices. Irmis gripped Fledgling's hand tighter, and cautiously, they entered the village and stood at the edge. "They'll think it was us," a brother from the Earth Clan was shouting. "You need to meet with their leaders." "We should use this to our advantage," a brother from the Sky Clan spoke up. Let them see what a host of fierce animals can do to their precious fort. Stop. All of you, stop, Canna said, eyeing Emmis and Nain, who stood on her left. Emmis nodded. We will send them a message explaining the Lorcas was protecting her cubs, and we will ask to meet with them, Canna announced. Now, return to your work. Ermis led Fledgling to Canna. Allow me to go. They won't know you don't have the gift. You're too vulnerable, Canna said as she pulled her daughter close. As the messenger should be, if we hope to keep the peace. Ermis knelt beside Fledgling. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. With that, Ermis shrugged off his furs and jogged toward the fort. His soaked breechclout barely bounced as he ran. Fledgling squirmed from her mother's grip and ran after him. She followed him to the edge of the forest, stopping behind one of the gigantic oaks. As he walked across the plain, she called 2 redbreasts. They flew ahead of him into the fort, as Fledgling requested. The distance made it difficult to know what happened when Ermis reached the fort. He raised his hands, proving he was unarmed. Fledgling blinked, and he disappeared. Had he walked in on his own? Did they drag him in? She prayed the spirits would keep him safe. Fledgling stayed behind the tree, waiting for the redbreasts. As the shadows grew long and Ermis had yet to reappear, she sat. She plucked the blades of grass around her. When the sun fell behind the sharp outline of the fort, Kitten came to sit with her. Kitten embraced her friend. Finally, one redbreast flew into the nearby tree, Tweety. Come, Fledgling said to the bird, while holding out her finger for a perch. You must tell Canna. The redbreast lighted on her finger, and she cupped it close to her chest as she and Kitten ran to the village. I don't understand what he means. Ermis and not Ermis? Please, spirits, let Mother understand, Fledgling thought. The girls didn't have to go far to find Canna, though. Stopping in front of her mother, Fledgling opened her hands. A transfigurer, her mother whispered. She thanked the redbreast and sent him on his way. Kitten, tell your mother to meet me at Nain's wigwag. After Kitten ran back to the village, Canna strode to Nain's with Fledgling trailing behind. Fledgling expected her mother to tell her to go home, but no order came. When they reached Nain's wigwag, Fledgling crawled inside and sat behind her mother. Emmis entered, breathing heavy. Kitten followed. I thought they were exiled to the north, Emmis said. We've been too complacent, Nain whispered as she rocked and nursed her toddler. We have underestimated Halbrand, Canna said. Their leader has not only gathered land, he has gathered valuable allies. We should assume he has more than one figure working for him, Emmis said. What if others have already been switched out? What if they swayed the decision to allow Halbrand to build the fort? Nain fired off her worries. That's unlikely. We would have noticed if a clansman was acting strangely or avoiding others, Canna said. What's their plan? Sow discord? Steal? Nain glanced behind Canna before continuing. Assassination? For the moment, I doubt anything so sinister. Gathering intel is more likely, Emmis said as she touched her fingertips together. Girls, Canna said as she shifted toward them, we have an important task for you. Kitten grinned. This may be confusing, Emmis said, but when Ermis returns, he will not be the man who left. Kitten's smile faded. They haven't hurt him, have they? Fledgling asked. Canna touched her daughter's hair. I hope not. You'll need to trail him as you usually would, Emmis instructed. It may be silly, but he may not remember where his wigwag is or what he typically does. And if you notice strange behavior, report it to us at once, Canna said. So for this third scene, one of my favorite parts is actually at the very beginning, when Fledgling and Kitten are making their dolls. And then Kitten goes to lead her away, and the doll that Fledgling's been working on falls to the ground and bursts apart. It's kind of a foreshadowing of what's to come for their people. And then the scene where Canna sings to cover up fledgling sobs after she's just witnessed the destruction of the forest. That scene was actually almost deleted because my editor actually thought that it was cruel for Canna to do that to fledgling. Um, when I wrote it, and still now when I read it, I think of it more as endearing. It's that the mother wants to hide or protect her daughter during her vulnerability. Um, I could see, I guess, where it might come across as maybe Kana is embarrassed and that's why she's doing it, but that was definitely not my intent. It's more of a protection, and then not only does the singing hide fledgling sobs, but it might also help soothe her. Um, I know one thing my editor brought up was how these people who can speak with animals would still go ahead and hunt, kill, and eat animals. Um, that actually never even crossed my mind as being an issue. Um, in the wild, there is a cycle of life. There's predator, there's prey. And since these people use these animals to hunt for them, they're just hunting what they normally would, and they're sharing in their bounty. Um, so that to me was never an issue. Um, and as I've mentioned earlier, that I'm not very good about creating like names for fantasy characters or even coming up with characters themselves as far as the animals. Um, it's kind of the same. I'm not very ambitious. I don't want to create my own languages. So in the rare instances where I do have to have like a foreign sounding word between the people groups, I usually use another language. So like in this scene, I went ahead and used a French word. And then the last thing that I'll say in this scene is just that we're introduced in this story to two people groups. We have the animal speakers, and then we have the transfigurers that we were just introduced to. In the novel that will be coming out, Tarnished Relics, we'll be introduced to two more. There are seers, and there are also weather singers. So we'll learn a bit more about them in the novel. I do have plans to tell a story from the perspective of a transfigurer at some point, because you can imagine that this gift, they're able to do what the mantle is, where they can change their outside appearance. So that can create, some issues possibly with other people groups, especially if they use it for ill intent. So that's pretty much all I have for this scene. So I hope you'll join me in the next one.